So the Seventh-day Adventist Church just recently had a religious liberty-themed Sabbath, and I want to share with you a sermon from my friend Pastor Larry Kirkpatrick. You should check out his church if you're ever in West Michigan. Head over to Muskegon or Fremont, Seventh-day Adventist churches. Enjoy him. Tell him hello from me. And I just want to hand the mic over to my friend Pastor Larry on the topic of religious liberty and history and current events and Bible prophecy.
For more than a century, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has placed an emphasis on religious liberty, and today that annual emphasis has become to us again. Religious liberty is a fundamental Protestant principle consistent with the character of Jesus. Now I'm going to put a map here on the screen of where I want to go with you today, and we've got a lot of ground to cover. I'm going to move rapidly, but let me remind you, your name, 3 words. And what I'm going to do during this sermon at different times, I'm going to say the first 2 words of our name, and you're going to answer me with the 3rd word. So we are Seventh-day Adventists. And because Adventist means we are looking for the soon return, the literal return of Jesus. And especially with this message today, this is a pretty solemn and lucid message, and I want us to be hopeful and not depressed. So at different times I'm going to say, and we're waiting for the Lord because we are Seventh Day, and you're going to say Adventist. Only you're going to say it a little bit more zealously, all right? Because we're looking for the coming of Jesus. And so even though we see intense times, we are living in intense times, we are not hopeless, we are hopeful because our Lord Jesus is coming soon. So all through history, God has given us free choice. All of our choices are made against the backdrop of a moral universe. God encourages us to choose the right. We are accountable, but He doesn't coerce us. He doesn't force us. He gave us free will, and He meant it. The exercise of free will, that's part of being human. Now you can begin today by flipping over to Luke chapter 4. We're going to start in Luke chapter 4, but we're looking mostly at signs of the times. And we're going to come up and study Revelation 18 a little bit, but we're coming on that pathway. Jesus came, He said, to proclaim, Luke 4:18, liberty to the captives. That's bringing freedom, that's giving hope. And free speech, the free practice of religion, a life secured by laws rather than by human dictators, with leaders who are held accountable to citizens. That's been rare in history, but we can be very thankful and count our blessings that here in America, mostly this has been our experience. It's not that the king or the governor or the president says thus and so, and that's the law. We have a constitution, we have laws. We believe that, and the people vote, the people decide. And so, I'm glad to say to you today that many Protestant Christians still believe in the separation of church and state, but I'm sad to say that I can't say most Protestant Christians. I can say that many Protestant Christians believe in that, but there are many Protestant Christians who don't perhaps have the right grip on separation of church and state. That's why we have our Liberty magazine. We send it to thought leaders, mayors, lawyers, judges, and so on. And you saw that in your bulletin insert today. And so this is the time we emphasize that. We want people to have a Protestant approach, but the Protestant approach is waning dramatically. And so today we're going to be forthright with the facts the best we can. From the beginning, one of America's boasts was that this was a nation without a king and a church without a pope. In fact, when in 1775 a British soldier ordered John Adams, John Hancock, and some other men who were with them, they ordered them to disperse in the name of George, sovereign of England. Do you know what the response was? John Adams responded, "We recognize no sovereign but God and no king but Jesus." And that, friends, that's the essence of America. God is going to be our leader here, but we're going to give free rights to everybody. We have a unique form of government. I want to take you back 238 years to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and what came to be called Independence Hall. In that hall, they were finishing, they had the final kind of draft of the United States Constitution, and they were debating whether they would adopt this or not. Benjamin Franklin had a prepared speech. He was feeling very ill, but he was present. He had his speech read because he wasn't able to read it. And I want to share with you on the screen part of what he had written. Benjamin Franklin. In these sentiments, sir, I agree to this Constitution with all of its faults, if they are such, because I think a general government necessary for us, and there is no form of government but what may be a blessing to the people if well administered. And believe further that this is likely to be well administered for a course of years, and can only end in despotism, as other forms have done before it, when the people shall become so corrupted as to need despotic government. I want you to notice carefully that Benjamin Franklin was very straightforward. He said this is going to end in a despotic government, but I'm here to recommend to you that we adopt this Constitution anyway, because for a period of years, this is going to be good for us. George Washington was chairing the meeting, and he was sitting in a chair, and on the back of the chair was this sun. And this is actually a picture, a photograph of the chair that's there today in Independence Hall. We still have the chair after 238 years. And that is a picture of the sun. But you can't tell if the sun, that half sun, is rising or setting. So they held their debate, and they went around, and finally they voted on the Constitution. And now they passed it, but it would still, each of the individual colonies had to, the government had, 9 of them had to approve it before it would come into effect. So it's not in effect yet, but they've approved it. And so at that point, Benjamin Franklin turned to George Washington and he said, "Sir," he says, "I've been looking at your chair throughout all of our deliberations, and I see the sun there, and I've never been able to tell whether that sun is rising or that sun is setting." And Benjamin Franklin said to Washington, he said, "Today I perceive that the sun is rising." It was a beautiful day. The Constitution was now there, and now they'd get to vote on it, and of course, we know that in due course, this was adopted and became a foundation to the United States of America. But notice the warning. This is the same day, by the way, you've probably heard the story too, that when they came out of the hall, there was a lady, Elizabeth Powell, and she called out and said to Benjamin Franklin, "So what do we have, a republic or a monarchy?" And Franklin said, "A republic, if you can keep it." Now, although Benjamin Franklin wasn't perhaps as much in the Christian line as some of the others, he still had a vision that was kind of like the Daniel 2 vision that we're all very well familiar with, right? What happens at the end of Daniel 2? All human governments, they rise and fall, right? And at the end, God's government is the only one and only. We talked about this the other week. And so, yes, we have a republic if we can keep it. I want to talk to you today, and I'm going to define for you what I believe is a situation that we have America, and I'm going to put it into 3 stages of history. 3 stages. We have early, middle, and late stages. I'm going to say that the early stage begins around the time of the founding of the Republic in 1776, in that space. You might not have ever even seen this flag before. I don't remember ever seeing it before, but this is the original flag that was the United States flag in 1776. You're probably thinking of Betsy Ross's flag or this rattlesnake flag, which is my favorite, but anyway, this was it. And that was our early flag. Let's talk about early stage America. Then we'll talk about middle stage, and then we'll spend energy on where we are, late stage America. What about early stage America? Well, in early stage America, what was it about? It was about liberty. If tyrants became overbearing, the people could act legitimately to replace faulty governance with a new government, which is exactly what our pioneers in America did. America was not an empire, America was an idea, and ours was a very small government. In fact, if you go over some of their deliberations in the earliest days, you find it was kind of like a church board meeting. You know, they're trying to figure out where they can find money to buy clothing for the soldiers. I mean, very things that just we kind of deal with in church boards kind of seem like they're smaller or mundane things. The government had very little money, and it was trying to figure out how to run things on a shoestring. It was a very small government. It was just an interesting time. So early stage America. A lot of our pioneers grew up in early stage America. Ellen White was born in the 1820s. That's early stage America. I'm going to say that early stage America goes out to about 1865. That's where we come to middle stage America. So again, early stage America was about liberty. It was an idea. In middle stage America, secession is no longer an option. Now you remember the Declaration of Independence says what? When a government becomes, I don't remember the exact words, when a government becomes unworkable anymore through tyrannies and so on, it's the right of the people to take it away and establish a new government, right? That's Declaration of Independence. Well, when we come to the middle stage of America, what happens? The South, there's slavery in America. There's an evil, especially pernicious and evil kind of slavery, not that there's really a good kind, but it was very dark. And it shouldn't exist, very bad, and I'm not for that kind of slavery whatsoever. But I'll tell you that in the United States Constitution, the states had the right to secede. So what happened? Shouldn't have done the slavery, but they said they were leaving. And what happened? Well, the United States repudiated the Declaration of Independence because they said, you're not leaving. And we all know the outcome of the war between the states, so they were not allowed to leave. And so this spirit of control continued to increase. And you may or may not know, but after the war between the states, there was many injustices perpetrated against all the citizens in the southern states. There was a period called Reconstruction. You can read all about it. And there were some good things, and there were some bad things that happened. There's a lot of things that weren't probably done just right. But anyway, there's good things that flowed out of that war, but a lot of sad pieces too. So America's government became imperialistic both at home and overseas. We began to have wars. We began to invade other countries. You may or may not know the history, like how we got Hawaii or what we did in the Philippines and some other places. But America became kind of imperialistic. And I'm not going to plow into all that. I'm just pointing out that we became embroiled in a variety of wars, including 2 global conflicts and then the Cold War. Now, what do you think happened when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989 and 1990? We just say, all right, we don't need all this intelligence agencies anymore. We don't need all this military anymore. You guys can all go home, plant some apple trees, and you know, plant some shade trees, and that's not what happened. What happened was the things that we had were kind of turned inwardly and began to be especially affecting American people. I'm going to put the line between middle stage and late stage America at September 11, 2001. Because what happened there was suddenly we were going to be in a war against terrorism. And there was terrorism. But that suddenly we had interesting developments. In fact, we had something that came to be known as the Patriot Act. 300 pages bill. Do you know that on September 11 we had the terrorist strike against the United States? Do you know that just 3 weeks later, on October 2, they had the 300-page bill for them to vote on? And by October 26, it had been voted by both houses of Congress, and the United States President had voted for it, and it became law. And there were some problems with the Patriot Act. But suddenly, instantaneously, practically, it was law. And I think that marks a pretty interesting transition between middle stage America and what I'm going to call late stage. And you might notice the flag is upside down there as kind of like an emergency sign. And I think we'll justify why I've put it that way. So, what's different about late stage America? Well, maybe before we go there, maybe we should remember something. All these kind of challenging and sober things we're talking about. We are Seventh-day Right, we're looking for the second coming of Christ, and so we can be hopeful even when we see some things that aren't as hopeful looking as we want them to be. Fair enough? So let's talk about some of the different business about late stage America. And there's a lot of, I'm just going to blast them onto the screen here. From 2001 onward, there was an inward turn in government intelligence agencies. You might remember a man named Edward Snowden and the revelation that America government was spying on its citizens, taking down all kinds of information on our citizens. Your emails are not private, sorry. Your text messages are not private. Your searches are not private. And the government is carefully gathering all this stuff. The public square moved from the printed page and the open face-to-face, moved largely into the electronic space. And you know the awesome thing about the electronic space? The unawesome thing? Censoring and monitoring and recording speech in the electronic space is very, very doable. And it's not only very, very doable, but the governments have been doing it. Censorship. Artificial intelligence enables censorship at scale. I've probably mentioned this. Many of our universities, including our own state, University of Michigan, and other major universities, the government has been awarding contracts, $500,000 here, $1.5 million there, and the software to censor people at scale was developed. And now that we have more of the artificial intelligence coming in, if you've got the software, you can follow phrases and things that people write and they put online, they put on Facebook and whatever. And you can individually, if you've got enough people, they can press the buttons and block things and so forth. But you know what? That's very costly because you've got to have all those bodies, all those warm bodies who are looking over all the stuff. But guess what? With artificial intelligence, you can censor people by pressing the button. You set up the program and it looks for certain words and they all line up on the screen and somebody presses a button and it all gets modified, censored, taken down or banned or reduced. And this now is the fact that artificial intelligence is out there today and can be used to censor our free speech. All it just requires is someone to do it, someone to say do it, and it's already there. These are changes that have happened since 2001. We're also in a safety over privacy culture. If you have a church and you want to build a playground for your church school, that was what we wanted to do in California. We had a church school with a church school. We started a church school with our church. And we found out about all the wonderful regulations in California. But they're not just in California. We found them in other states. But if you want to have a school playground, if you want to have swings, well, people don't want to insure swings. It's not as safe. And so there's all kinds of rules about you've got to spend up thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to put in the right kind of stuff. But that's just one example of it. This safety over privacy is a pretty big issue. And we saw it in the last few years too, didn't we? Safety over privacy. These are giant changes. Regulatory capture. A lot of the major agencies in our government that are there supposedly to help us. The Center for Disease Control, the FDA. A lot of these are, you know what happens when people finish their term? The same people suddenly become lobbyists for the big pharmaceutical corporations. It's called the revolving door. The people that regulate automobiles, suddenly they're in the one that's the transportation. And there's a lot of this regulatory capture. The mainstream media. Well, guess what? The mainstream media is changing, and with the internet, there's a lot of changes there. And now the mainstream media has become extremely dependent on big pharmaceutical dollars to do its advertisements. So it's kind of hard to be objective and fair and factual when the people that are paying for you to be on the air, when those people, if they pulled their advertising dollars, your company would be in trouble. Interesting pieces. Here's some more. Narrative control. Technology, you all have it, and probably you've all experienced it. Within the last 24 hours, I would wager, you probably have one of those gadgets, the cell phone. Maybe you've done a search on the internet for something, I don't know what, something in the last 24 hours. When you combine the internet and the cell phone, the smartphone technology and so on, and you combine all this other stuff, it's very possible to control the messages that go out about what the big story is. What's the big story today? And how do you speak about that story. So narrative control is now extremely technologically enabled. This is the world we're living in, but Jesus is coming. This shouldn't surprise us. Financial control. So, big free choice out there. What do you have, Visa or MasterCard? Or maybe Bank of America, but you've got just a small number of corporations, and you pay a lot of your bills, and you buy stuff pretty much based on just a handful of companies. There is enormous financial control out there, and there's ways that manifests itself. The Pope is, for the last 40 years or so, the Pope has come globally to be regarded as the major moral influencer. If you want to know what's moral, go see what the Pope says. We have secular religions, the LGBTQ emphasis, and others. Those are dominant today. And then we have submission on a vast scale from American Christianity to government mandates. When we had events here 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there was no major Christian denomination, not one, that really resisted strongly some of the mandates that happened at that time. You'd think that some would have different opinions, but no, virtually not one. So these are some of the pieces we see that are different after 2001. These are some of the pieces that we have under the situation of late-stage America. You know what we might find? We might find that many of the benefits we have enjoyed as a Christian group under the framework of a society of middle-stage America that many of us grew up in, we might find that some of those benefits disappear. Because I don't think we're in the same place, It's like we're not in Kansas anymore. We're not in early-stage America. We're a long ways from that. And I would say to you, we're a long ways from middle-stage America. We are already deeply into late-stage America, and it's not going to get particularly more joyful. But guess what? We are Seventh-day Adventists. We believe in the second coming of Christ. Yes, and so we can be positive anyway. In fact, it's closer than it's ever been. What benefits might disappear? Well, loss of privacy. Do you remember contact tracing? We didn't do it really here, but some churches, they were very adamant to do it. When you went to church, you had to sign in. Just in case the government needed that information, like in case, That's a loss of privacy. The right to gather for worship. Well, in some places, things were really closed down. Even I remember one church, they went in their parking lot, they went to the parking lot and they used speakers, and the government rolled in and said, you can't do this. Travel restrictions. Do you know anybody in Canada? Do you have any relatives in Canada? Do you know that in these last 3 or 4 years, 5 years, if you didn't toe the line on the exact things they said, you could not even really cross the border. Travel restrictions. In Canada, several pastors were arrested because they held church services when the government said to be closed. The exercise of property rights. You own your own property, but guess what? Our schools, the government, the state of Michigan can come in a moment and say, if you don't do what we say, the Department of Health will close you down. So we own the schools, but boy, we own it, but it's kind of just closed downable. Is that a word? Closed downable? So we have our ownership issues. We have participation in the financial system. What happens when the bank says we won't do this anymore because we don't like your values? We'll talk about that in a minute. Participation in medical and legal frameworks. You know that lawyers have to sign things, and this has happened in America, but more so even in Canada. If you've got to toe a certain line, we believe in these things, or they disbar you. And then there's heating restrictions. And you say, what? What do you mean? What about heating? Well, here's one. This article, I think, was from this week. Sweden is closing churches to meet climate goals, including historic churches from the Middle Ages. Now, so in Sweden, of course, you have a state government. It's a Lutheran church, and the state pays for part of it. So it's not quite like here in America. But do you know what they're saying is that, and I read the article, and the article says, many of our churches are small. So what? But many of our churches are small, and they run on heating oil. When you burn heating oil, it increases the carbon usage. And when the carbon usage increases, we're contributing to, supposedly, to global climate change and global warming. So what we're going to do is we're going to close some of our churches during the winter because we don't want to contribute to global warming. And some people in Sweden have objected to having their church closed because it's winter. But the government said, your church is closed. So this is Sweden. This is in the heart of, highly secularized Scandinavian nations. This isn't America. But it's an interesting trend, possibly, isn't it? Yeah, I mentioned not being able to participate in the financial system. Here's an article. This is about a year and a half old, so this isn't even new news. And if you read the whole article, The Rise of Religious Debanking, they talk about various ministries that were debanked. The banks that they were operating with told them, we won't do business with you anymore, because you're doing this ministry here in this African nation and this and that, and you're not subscribing to our values. And so imagine what would happen when we come to a space where the bank won't take our money because our values are not preferred. So these are some of the dark pieces here. What about AI? Did any of you see the big fight this week between the presidential first lady and the vice president? Well, it's a deep fake. It didn't really happen. But AI is learning how to fake things, and there's a video circulating just the last couple of days that shows at the funeral, that shows they got together and there was tension, and then they had a big fight, and you can see it online. It looks absolutely lifelike, absolutely real, because they now have the technology. They can make a picture of anybody fighting, and it is absolutely true to life. That's where we are. They call those deep fakes. So that they didn't really fight. So just so we don't get in trouble here. But what happens when AI learns to lie really well? By the way, AI, it can track you and know the things you click on, the things you read, how much time you spent reading on it. You all know how it works, right? If you do a search for, let's say you want to buy a violin for your grandkids for Christmas. And so you go up and you do a search for violins. Well, what do you see for the next week and a half on your computer? Violin ads, or whatever it is, right? Because what happens is all the data from your searches has been sold, it's been recorded, it's been sold out, and the companies that sell violins have bought it, and now they're going to spit advertisements for violins at you for the next week. That's the way it works. And so whenever you do a search, it's not private. These things are known. So AI, what happens when AI gets so good and it already knows the things you're suspicious of? And what happens when AI is really, really good at lying to you? How's that going to work out for you? I'm just warning you. We're living in some crazy times, but we are Seventh-day Adventists, and we know Jesus is coming soon. We can be thankful. Now, in case you have doubts, let me give you a couple of quotations here that might be of interest to you. Now, this one is just from the Desire of Ages. But now, let's be real. Here it is. In the last great conflict in the controversy with Satan, those who are loyal to God will see every earthly support cut off. Because they refuse to break his law in obedience to earthly powers, they will be forbidden to buy or sell. Is that pretty plain speaking, brothers and sisters? Now, I'd be unhappy. How would you do if 50% of your earthly supports were cut off? You'd be in a world of hurt if 50% of your earthly supports were cut off. 75%, 90%. Every earthly support is going to be cut off. That's where we're headed. It didn't happen in early stage America. It didn't happen in middle stage America. But if this is the last stage, if we're in last stage America, then that's going to happen to us, or at least whoever's alive at the very end. Here's one other. Now, I'm going to admit here now, I'm going to be rebuked by this next one. I feel silly. Let's look at it. That's Desire of Ages 121, but let's look at the Last Day Events, page 147. We need not be surprised at anything that may take place now. I publicly admit I was very surprised by what happened 5 years ago. Were you? You don't have to admit it. I'm going to admit it. But she says we need not be surprised at anything that may take place. Now, this is written 100 years ago. We need not be surprised at anything that may take place now, 150 years ago, presumably still today, right? We need not marvel at any developments of horror. Well, 4 and 5 years ago, I was marveling at the developments. Maybe some of you were too. We couldn't believe the things that we saw that were happening in America. But she's telling us, don't be surprised. Those who trample under their unholy feet the law of God have the same spirit as had the men who insulted and betrayed Jesus. So we shouldn't be that surprised. Should not be that surprised. About 15 years ago, the United States president, who was president at that time, and this was President Obama, there was a change in how he referred to freedom of religion. The phrase that used to be freedom of religion, and President Obama began referring to freedom of worship. Well, freedom of worship is a subcategory of freedom of religion. Freedom of worship is just saying you can go to church, but you could say if we're going to restrict freedom of worship, you can't hand out any literature. You can't do this. You can't preach publicly. You can't do this or that. But we'll let you go and do this. It's restricted. And in case somebody thinks, well, yeah, that was one political party or that was one president, guess what? 2 years later, the next president, who's going to be president in 2 weeks from now, again, unless something even weirder happens, he used the same language. Freedom, change from freedom of religion to freedom of worship. So I know we still ask ourselves, well, how can this be? How can this be? So I turn again to Rod Dreher's important book, and I believe I've mentioned this from the front here before. He's using Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He was a Soviet dissident, and he wrote the Gulag Archipelago. But Dreher writes this book, Live Not by Lies, and he's building on the things that Solzhenitsyn learned in the Soviet Union. I'm going to give you a couple of thoughts from this book. This book is called Live Not by Lies, a Manual for Christian Dissidents. Well, what's a dissident? A dissident is somebody that doesn't agree with the government. And like we're neutral, we're not pro or con, we're not for this party or that, we're neutral. But guess what? What happens when the government isn't neutral? See, and here's a problem. Protestant looks a lot of times at the Catholic threat and we say, whoa, there's a big Catholic threat here. And that's right. But you know what happens? We don't think about the secular threats. And we're living today in a time when the secular has got a lot to say, and it's very religious. So anyway, in his book, Live Not by Lies, a couple of things he says here. By the way, how did he know? How did Rod Dreher know there were problems? Because he knew a lot of people that had come out from behind the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe. They had lived under a totalitarian society where you had to lie all day long. And these people, many of them came to America when the Iron Curtain came down and they were able to come to America. And now, after coming to America, they could not believe their eyes because they were seeing the very things that they saw in Eastern Europe when they were younger. They were seeing some of those things begin to manifest here in America. And they're telling Rod Dreher, hey, things are changing. By the way, this book was written mostly in 2019. It was published in 2020. So this stuff here was mostly we weren't even in 2020 hardly when this was published. In other words, that stuff didn't really, he had the book before largely we came to that. Anyway, some things from his book. For the people of those captive nations, this is Dreher speaking, totalitarian meant the near total destruction of any institutions independent of the state. It meant complete economic submission to the state and general material immiseration. So it meant, you were poor and struggling. It meant the politicization of all aspects of life enforced by secret police, prisons, and labor camps. It meant the harsh persecution of religious believers, the crushing of free speech and expression, and the erasure of historical and cultural memory. Page 28. That's what those people came from. And then they looked in America and they said, their jaw dropped. They said, this very thing, we're seeing elements of this here. They couldn't believe it. Because everybody in America was thinking middle stage America. Because we grew up, many of us, in middle stage America. Hannah Arendt wrote this book. It's the book on totalitarianism. She was studying the Nazi thing and all the things that happened there. And this book came out in I think it was 1948 or maybe it's 1958. Hannah Arendt's book. Dreher quotes her book, and here's what she says about totalitarianism. By the way, she says that when you have totalitarianism, what is it that it is? How does it work? Totalitarian movements are mass organizations of atomized, isolated individuals. And then here's her quote. What prepares men for totalitarian domination in the non-totalitarian world is the fact that loneliness, this is what she wrote, once a borderline experience, usually suffered in certain marginal social conditions like old age, has become an everyday experience for the ever-growing masses of our century. So she's talking about mass population is lonely and feels an emptiness and a lack of meaning. And although today more people than ever are connected by cell phones and the internet, today there's an epidemic of loneliness. Today people are lonely and depressed and they feel totally isolated and alone. Many people really suffer dramatically from that. Even though we're more connected than ever before, but we're not connected face to face, we're connected through the device, which records basically everything you do. Challenges. And basically what we have here today is the politicization of everything. This is what totalitarianism is. It is the politicization of everything. And by the way, what does everything include? Yes. It would include the church. The church could get to a place where it begins to cancel people. But we are Seventh-day Adventists, and who's coming soon? Are these things unexpected? Does the Bible tell us about these things? Yes. How is it that everything's becoming politicized? We talked about it already a little bit, but here's from Dreher's book again. There's 4 of these here. Consumerism is how we are learning to love Big Brother. Big Brother, George Orwell's novel, 1984, a dystopian outcome in the future where the government controls everything. It controls what history is and all that. So he's referring to that. Consumerism is how we are learning to love Big Brother. What's more, Big Brother is not exactly who we expected him to be, a political dictator, though one day he may become that. At the present moment, Big Brother's primary occupation is capitalist. So what is that? He's a salesman, he's a broker, he's a gatherer of raw materials and a manufacturer of desires. He is monitoring virtually every move you make to determine how to sell you more things. And in so doing, learning how to direct your behavior. You did a search on violins. Now you're going to get violin ads. Yeah. And anyway, he keeps talking here. In this way, Big Brother is what? Big Brother is laying the foundation for soft totalitarianism, both in terms of creating and implementing the technology for political and social control, and by, grooming the population to accept it as normal. Do you know that if you took everybody's cell phone away today, there would be riots? There are all kinds of teachers on the internet who they took the cell phone away from the kids in the classroom. And have you seen those? Have you heard about that? Students physically assaulting the teachers. Some teachers have been killed. Took away the kids' phone in the classroom. People are addicted. They're designed to be addicted. Some of us have elements of addiction to electronic devices. Don't you think? Sorry about it. And by the way, the masters of data aren't simply trying to figure out what you like. They're now at work making you like what they want you to like without their manipulation being detected. As I said, when you go to search for something, it puts a cookie on your computer and it goes out and it's sold immediately to the advertisers, and now you get violin ads all day long, whatever it is. So, and now with AIs, it just takes a few commands, a few images, a few words, and the voices of any person can be realistically faked. I referred to the fake fight video. What happens, by the way, when the AIs learn to lie? I mean, they already can lie by making up these fake videos, but what happens when they learn to lie to us? By the way, who are they going to learn to lie from? They're going to learn to lie from us. And they're going to be so good at lying to us that where are we going to be? That's the world that we are in. We are in late stage America. We're entering into amazing times, and one can't help but admit that we've not even begun to truly prepare for this threat environment that we face in late stage America. Well, let's open our Bible now from Luke 4 to Revelation 13, and we're going to talk briefly about Revelation 13 and 11 and Revelation 18. Some among us seem to want to read the Revelation 13 scenario apart from Revelation chapters 11 and 18. Now, you know Revelation 13, this is all old news, but it's very current news, right? Revelation 13 lays out the end-time scenario that we all know indisputably. The power represented by the lamb-like / dragon-like beast in Revelation 13, verse 11, that's going to employ its abilities to deceive us so that the people of earth are led to worship the sea beast. That's the first 10 verses of Revelation 13. In some manner, he's going to cause those who refuse to worship the sea beast to be economically sanctioned. They won't be able to buy or sell. They won't be able to participate in the economic life of the nation. They'll be rendered incapable of buying and selling. They'll have to submit to coercion to buy or sell. And of course, once they submit, they will have the benefit, don't know I'd call it that, the mark of the beast, so they'll be able to buy or sell. Now, it's our understanding that the sea beast represents the papacy. The lamb-like, dragon-like beast represents America under the control of a fallen away version of Protestantism. The speaking of the image, Revelation 13, verse 15, says the image that's created will speak. We believe that's the passage of a law exalting and enforcing the worship of Sunday. These are all kind of things we've all heard many times, so I'm not going to expand on those. But I said we should look at Revelation 13 in light of Revelation chapters 11 and 18. So let's think about that. For example, let's flip back to Revelation 11 if you want. We'll just take a moment with Revelation 11. Revelation 11 has got a lot going on there, and this won't be an exposition of Revelation 11, but I'm going to point to you to verse 8. Revelation 11, verse 8. So what do we have here? The church is being measured and so forth. And there's two witnesses, they're slain, and then they come back to life. And we believe, just the summary of it, we believe that Revelation 11 is outlining a lot of things that happened in the French Revolution, where the Bible was suppressed, but God brought it back anyway. But what's interesting is if you look at Revelation 11, verse 8, you have this interesting line here. In fact, I've got a slide here somewhere for it. Some of my slides are scrambled up here. Okay, here we go. There's Revelation 11, verse 8, New American Standard. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Well, what does Sodom and Egypt represent? Those represent two of the most atheistic cities or nations that have ever been. Sodom didn't exactly have a community church, right? Egypt was where the Pharaoh said, "Who's the Lord God? I don't know this Lord God. Who is he that I should obey him? He's going to have to make me obey." And God did. So these two nations represent atheism. And France is the home of modern secularism. It really begins philosophically in France. And what do you have? If this is representing the French Revolution, we have the Bible, the Old and New Testament perhaps, slain, lying in the street of the great city, called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Well, we know the Lord was crucified in Jerusalem, in just outside Jerusalem, right, in the land of Israel. So anyway, this is combining several symbols here together, Sodom, Egypt, and the place where Jesus was crucified. But I'm here to say to you that what was it that all symbolizes all those things, kind of tend to symbolize together? Secularism, living without God, a godless outlook on life, a godless viewpoint on life. So what happens when we get to the end times? What happens when we're in Revelation 18? Here's our too small to read outline of Revelation 18. But what's going on in Revelation 18? You can turn to Revelation 18 if you want. You have these three main powers. Now, first you have Babylon has fallen. Babylon is one of the three main powers here. What's going on in Babylon? Babylon represents all false religion, particularly the papacy, I believe. We can prove that especially from Revelation 17 and other places. But there's two other powers in Revelation 18 that we don't often think about. Revelation 18, verses 9 and 10, talk about the kings of the earth. Who is that today? The political leaders. We've talked about that here before. And then half the chapter, verses 11 to 19, talks about the merchants of the earth. Who's the merchants of the earth? Who's that? So these are the three powers that combine in Revelation 18. And could it be that we're living in a time when we have Revelation 18 stuff going on? We have the kings of the earth, the merchants of the earth. These people have a lot of power. Babylon, false religion, has a lot of power. I know what you think MAGA stands for. Make America Great Again. Because we've all heard it for the last year, right? And longer. But I want to suggest to you MAGA should stand for something different in your mind. Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon. Those are the merchants in Revelation 18. Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon. If those people began to shut you down today, where would you be? I'm telling you that we are living in a very interesting scenario today. And MAGA can mean Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon. Perhaps you've also noticed that a remarkable number of people are being brought into the new United States administration. Have you looked at who the heads of the new different departments are going to be? Almost, well, they're not all, but many of them. More than any I've ever seen in any presidential administration. Roman Catholic, Roman Catholic, Roman Catholic, Roman Catholic. I'm not trying to stir us up into unhappiness. I'm just saying I feel a little bit careful when I see that, because Roman Catholicism, the reason there is Protestant view on religious liberty is because what the papacy did to believers in Jesus down through the ages. Okay? So we're kind of like the opposite. So yeah, I'm kind of concerned about that. By the way, when you look at Revelation 18, go down to verse 23. What do you find in verse 23? I'll read it. And the light of a lamp will not shine in you any longer. The voice of the bridegroom and the bride will not be heard in you any longer. This is talking about the Babylon being destroyed. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your pharmakia, your sorcery. And so the great men of the earth, who are the great men of the earth today? I'll bet you that we could all start naming people off right now. We can put them right on the screen. Who's Mark Zuckerberg? Who was Elon Musk? Who was Bill Gates? You all know the answers. These are some of the wealthy, the great men of the earth. And some of them are associated with these large mega corporations, which control every aspect of our lives. But even though we see all these things, and even though it looks problematic, even though we know persecution will come to us, we are Seventh-day Adventists. Are we surprised, brothers and sisters? No. Is Jesus coming soon? Yes. So we don't need to be discouraged. And my goal is not to discourage me or you with these words. My goal is that we would be solemnly aware of the times we're living in. I believe we're living in late stage America. Late stage America. And God's going to finish, and God's going to win. We're living in a time that we need to watch for original thinkers and be careful that we don't cancel them. Do you remember what the Bible says? 1 Chronicles 12:32. Out of all the tribes of Israel, there was a certain group of people, the sons of Issachar. And the Bible says they were men who understood the times and had knowledge of what Israel should do. And I've come to believe, kind of sadly, that original thinkers among God's people might be a little bit few sometimes. And I think we need to be careful, very careful, what messages God sends and what servants he has and who he sends. We need to be very careful that we ourselves do not begin to become people who cancel possibly even some of God's servants. We need to be very careful. Jeremiah got canceled. What happened? Just exactly what God said would happen. Isaiah got canceled. What happened? Just exactly what God said would happen. And you can go down the list. Be careful who you cancel, because we don't know exactly who God might be sending us in this hour. Amen. Well, I want to come down finally here to talk about changing our expectations. Because we're not in early stage America, we're not in middle stage America. I believe we're in what we could call late stage America. And we might find that things that we want, we would prefer could be done for us, can't be done for us in the same way anymore. When the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union was there, was the church able to do everything they wanted for its members at that time? No. A lot of things had to be done. God gave supernatural help. A lot of things had to be done in a very surreptitious way because the government was watching. And if you are debanked, boy, you'd be in a troublous spot. And all we're waiting for today, for the financial control, I mean, they already control your Visa and MasterCard, right? But friends, we are one global event away from a crash of the economy, and suddenly, well, don't worry, it'll be okay. We have central bank digital currencies available for you. In fact, we'll even give you some for free. But you will need to have a digital ID to participate in this wonderful program. That's what we are. We are one global event away from having every single transaction monitored by the government. That's all it would take. Could it be that things that the church organization, which was so masterfully constructed, it did so well at during the middle stage of America? Could it be that we're coming to a time when the church might not be able to deliver all the kinds of helps and services to late stage America that it could do for us before? So I can't tell you the future in detail. I can't tell you, what it may have to be done to change. I'm not here trying to say to change your expectations of the organized church. I'm not telling you to abandon the church. I'm not telling you anything like that at all. But if you expect to be bailed out, in middle stage America, you had a problem with your employer, our religious liberty people would come and help you, maybe write letters for you, maybe even help you in a legal case. And they still do that, even though we're in late stage America. They'll help you. But we may come to a time when even those kinds of helps may not be available in the way they were available before. And so, friends, I'm not trying to lower our expectations, but I'm trying to say that we're living in a time when our expectations of what the church organization can and can't do for us we might need to modify it. If the church is prevented from opening a school because there's a health event, and the government says you can't open your school, it may be that the organized church won't be able to open that school until the government allows them to. So I'm trying to give our leaders some space to adjust to things without compromising, of course. But I'm saying just because they're bound by the situation doesn't mean they're unfaithful. And thankfully, we can say today we do have Religious Liberty Department. We do have ability to help with job issues and different kinds of issues like that. So we still have it. I don't know how long it will be, but we still have it, and we should strengthen it while we can. I'm suggesting that the constraints that God's church functions in may mean we're not going to be able to expect that we can be delivered from some of the impositions against our liberties that are incoming. God's church continued to exist under totalitarian oppression in the Soviet Union, but you know what? God worked with them in many supernatural ways, and the church persisted there. Now, while some Protestants have clear-eyed clear eyes about the threats posed by the papacy, it seems to me that few Protestants have clear eyes about the threats posed by her partners in Revelation 18. The kings of the earth, maybe we have some concern about that, but the merchants of the earth, we really haven't thought about all that connection and how much our life is impacted by our connections with the merchants of the earth. The entire world system is represented by Babylon, the kings of the earth, Babylon, the merchants of the earth. And a lot of our fellow Protestants can see the Catholic threat, maybe some see that, but a lot of them don't see the secular threat. And I'm here today to say to you, as a believer in Jesus, I think we have some pretty giant secular threats. And we shouldn't turn our back on those. We shouldn't despair. Why? Because we are Seventh-day Adventist, and who's coming soon? Jesus. So we shouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't marvel at horrors. We should say, this is a sign of the times. In his book, Live Not by Lies, there's one paragraph here I want to bring to you here in conclusion, near the conclusion here. Now, he's not a Seventh-day Adventist, but he says, what should Christians do who are living under this pre-totalitarian or early totalitarian society? I'm going to put it on the screen, what he suggested. The task of the Christian dissident today, now we talked about dissidents, right? Who would be the utmost in Christian dissidents? Seventh-day Adventists would be. If you don't agree with the government, when the government restricts your religious liberty, you're a dissident. And we don't want to be a dissident. We want to all get along and have smiley faces and happy, but we might be dissidents. So here's what he says. The task of the Christian dissident today is to personally commit herself to live not by lies. How can she do that alone? Well, really, it's hard to live without lies if you're doing it alone. So he says this, she needs to draw close to authentic spiritual leadership. That means pastors, laity, or both, spiritual leaders, and form small cells of fellow believers with whom she can pray, sing, study scripture, and read other books important to their mission. This is what they did behind the Iron Curtain. This is how Christianity survived in Eastern Europe. These four things. They gathered together, they prayed, they sang, they studied the Bible, and they learned about their situation they were in the best they could. With her cell, the dissident discusses the issues and challenges facing them as Christians, especially challenges to their liberties. They employ the Kolakovich method of see, judge, act. That is, to identify the challenge, discern together its meaning, and then act on your conclusions. See, act, judge. That was their slogan. Where are we in the flow of history? And so today, this kind of solemn talk here, this isn't all happy stuff. This is pretty solemn stuff. But you know what? Jesus is coming. In fact, it can't be that much longer, can it? And so, interesting suggestion here. Getting together, maybe in private settings, so you can study the Bible together, pray together. By the way, in China today, there's a lot of this happening. There's a state church and there's non-state churches. And behind the scenes, there's a lot of people gathering and worshiping the Lord Jesus. Finally, in Live Not by Lies, there was a statement he made on page 105 of his book, and I thought it was especially pertinent. I'm going to put it on the screen here. You have to live in a world of lies. But it's your choice as to whether that world lives in you. If you are studying the Bible, if you are walking with Jesus, if you're having daily experience with Jesus, a person, the personal God, the God of Scripture, if you're walking with Him, you do not have to live by lies. If Jesus lives in you, that world of lies does not need to live in you. And so it's critical that we have Jesus with us. Finally, I have one last quotation for you here today, and this comes from kind of an obscure reference from Ellen White, but this, when I saw this, it really shocked me because this, to me, this explains our world today. Okay, so this, let me give it to you. This is Signs of the Times, December 29, 1890. Babylon is a symbol of the world at large. When its doom was made certain, its kings and officers seemed to be as men insane, and their own course hastened its destiny, the destiny of Babylon. When the doom of a nation is fixed, now she moves to the principle. When the doom of a nation is fixed, it seems that all the energy, wisdom, and discretion of its former time of prosperity deserts its men of position, and they hasten the evil they would avert. Outside enemies are not the greatest peril to an individual or a nation. The overthrow of a nation results, under the providence of God, from some unwise or evil course of its own. Now, let me work it through one last time here. Babylon is a symbol of the world at large, so she's talking symbolically. Now she moves to when Babylon's doom was made certain. Who? Its kings and officers. Who? The leaders, right? The leaders. They seem to be like insane people. Sometimes, have you ever had just the beginning of that thought about some of our leaders? You don't need to say anything. But she says that their course hastened its destiny. And then she said, now she moves to the principle, when the doom of a nation is fixed, because God sets them up, God takes them down. When God determines that it's the take them down part, when the doom of a nation is fixed, it seems that all the energy, wisdom, and discretion of its former time of prosperity, we'd be here talking about early stage America, middle stage America, or at least early stage America, that deserts its men of position, and without meaning to, they hasten the evil they would avert. Remember the Bible verse that says we can do nothing against the truth but for the truth? And then she said this at the end, right? Outside enemies are not the greatest peril to an individual or a nation. And then what's the summary? The overthrow of a nation results under God's providence from some unwise or evil course of its own. In other words, the leaders that are appointed completely get it backwards. And friends, this is what we would expect under late stage America. As we look around ourselves, could this be exactly what we see, this reality that we see today? That the time of America's prosperity is now past, that its men of position, whether in government, politics, or religion, are largely persons whose energy, wisdom, and discretion are now deserting them. Could it be that Benjamin Franklin's warning that the Constitution they then created would serve only for a course of years, and that at the end of America, sometime during late stage America, it would all end in despotism? Could we be at that spot? Could we be at the ending where, is that what Revelation 13 shows? Despotism at the end? Yes, no surprise. Does Revelation 18 show despotism? Yes. But guess what? We are Seventh-day Adventist. Jesus is coming soon. Should we be surprised by these things? No. Was I surprised anyway? Yes. Okay, I'm silly. But I'm learning. And now the sun that was on the back of George Washington's chair. Maybe it was rising 200 years ago, but if we're in late stage America, then we're in the time when that sun is setting. So my suggestion is that we have come to the time foretold when we will in due course see our religious liberties rapidly erode. We will even see a culture of cancellation attempt to manifest itself in the nation, in the media, all around, and possibly it could happen even in the church, God forbid. We live in a time of emergency. We live in a time when things are shifting. There's a passage into pre-totalitarianism, and then it'll certainly go to totalitarian things. 238 years ago, Franklin saw the sun rising. Now we think maybe it's setting. Is this cause for depression? No. We were reminded that God is sending reinforcements. What has He promised to His church? The latter rain. He's going to give us just what we need so that we can come through. Friends, it's Bible prophecy. Bible prophecy is not on hold. Somehow you become a Seventh-day Adventist and you think all this stuff it fulfills in history, and we go through the times and the different time prophecies, but somehow the last piece is always way out there 50 years in the future. I'm telling you, there comes a time when it's not 50 years in the future, it's not 25 years in the future. There comes a time when it's not 5 years in the future or even 1 year in the future. Friends, let us rise and shine. Our light is coming. Jesus is coming soon. God has a lot for us to do, but we know what? That every earthly support will be cut off. Okay. So our goal now should be to draw closer to Jesus now while time remains and discover ways to share His truth now before the work becomes even more difficult. Friends, Jesus will not abandon us. His present truth is still here for us today. And so today we've dealt a lot with signs of the times. We haven't gotten plowed into the scriptures quite as deeply as I would have liked, but we trying to kind of catch up on where we are. Friends, I'm certain that as the times are going to become difficult, God will not abandon us. But if we abandon Him, then you're on your own, buddy. We're free in Him, but even if we've entered into late stage America, we shouldn't lose hope. Jesus is coming soon. While there's still time, we can influence lawyers, mayors, thought leaders, judges, those who support religious liberty. Their support of it is essential as long as we can. And so we have the religious liberty business today reminding you that we want to help people at least have an opportunity to hear a Protestant, Christian, biblical view of religious liberty. So friends, today, a pretty stern message, pretty solemn, not a happy face. But can we say as our last thing today, we are Seventh-day Adventists. Friends, who's coming soon? Jesus. Does that discourage you or does that encourage you? The things are coming to pass just as it was foretold. God is still on His throne, and very soon He's going to step off of that throne. He's coming here.